Next, Luis Pomales interviews Luis Puig, author of the memoir Born Again. His story begins in communist Cuba with a frail and sickly child whose father was Castro's political prisoner, and a family struggling to survive in a totalitarian regime. Then a daring escape in an overcrowded fishing boat full of refugees, and a rebirth as a submariner in the United States Navy. The book has recently placed in the Latino Books into Movies Awards for 2020 and is in the process of being made into a film.
Papi me tenía by the belt.
You were over the side.
And I'm on the side. Puking. The 14 hours.
Now, how come Cubans don't talk about that? They like, shh, no diga nada, no diga nada. No habla de Castro, you know.
It's almost like a mental blockage that they have.
Conditioning.
Yeah. It's so, well, think about it. In my case, my grandmother, the one that raised me, my Hortensia, I never saw her again. So you always remember that. I remember, seeing her waving goodbye at the portal as we were leaving on the car, and I never saw that again, ever. So you don't want to relive a lot of those painful memories, because it's so triste, you really don't.
But do you know how that is perceived by others? Like, what are you hiding?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And that's why I wrote the book, so people learn and see what we went through and what's inside,
Well, not too many people have the courage to tell that story. I would dare think that some Cubanos might be angry at you for saying those things, and yet there's probably a whole group of you who, yay, right on, finally, alguien dijo algo. It wasn't a make-believe thing. It really happened to us. So what I wanted to do was start off by giving history. I know you have Greek, French, Italian blood in you from your father's side.
Father's side. We're a mixture of Iberian, French, Italian, Austrian, and German. I got Northern African, the Moors and all that.
Yes. So I would like for you to talk about where your family came from, and talk about the 1890s and start from there. But the first question I'm going to ask you is, what was your motivation to write this book?
So many great stories that I came up with, and the thing that kept coming to me was, why didn't anybody write down at least a few things of what happened? Because it seems like, every generation or two generations, people then forget, and you have to start all over again. And this story is like my grandfathers, my maternal, my paternal grandfathers, all the things they did and all that. I would have loved to hear them when I was in Cuba, and they wouldn't talk about it much over there. It wasn't until I started writing this book here that I talked to my Aunt Nancy in Florida, that I started recounting some of the things. And it's like, why didn't anybody write this stuff down? In many families, it's stuff like that. It happens, that people had a great ancestries, great people that did things in their family. And then 2 or 3 generations after that, it's gone. So I think, you know what? I'm going to write it down so the lessons are remembered. My brother's got 4 kids. They know what happened. My son knows what happened. And it's recorded for history. I mean, that's basically it.
Tell me the name of the book.
Born Again. And basically what happened to me. When we landed here in Key West in 1980, we started all over again. And I was rebirthed as an American, basically. Currently, I am the maintenance manager for Cintas at the plant in North Philadelphia. I'm in charge of Plant 61, all the maintenance and the engineering and all that over there. I live in Maryland, so the commute is about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And then going home, the traffic on 95, because people going to New Jersey, a lot of people live in New Jersey and they work in Philly over there.
You're amazing.
Sometimes it's 2.5, 3 hours. So I just play the radio, put music on, and I get home when I get home.
What's your academic background?
Mostly it's military training. I did some rivalidades, equivalents out here, project manager, internal auditor, and all that. So people would understand who I am. In the Navy, I made it all the way to planner, engineering planner for repair for nuclear subs. I'm the guy who, when they had a major problem, somebody would come into port, and we would go down there and take a look. Okay, you got a problem with your turbines or your generators and all that. I go back to my office, pull blueprints out and all that, and generate the procedures, literally engineering procedures, on how to fix nuclear submarines. The subsea program is a very controlled program where everything is literally directed. You don't get mechanics and grab a wrench and go and fix something over there. They're literally writing step-by-step procedures on how to do things, to the point where it says, step 1, mechanic correct 3/4 inch wrench. Step 2, mechanic put 3/4 inch wrench on bolt 3/4 inch. And they give you the serial number on the bolt and all that. So everything is very controlled because we don't want people making mistakes. You can kill people. So my position was, I made it all the way up to that level of knowledge. and retired from basically that.
So you're an electrical engineer or mechanical?
Mechanical and electrical. When I first joined the Navy and the Submarine Force, I first went as a sonar tech. I was in Airedale in the active reserves, went to college, was in the NRLTC for a couple of years, joined full active and became a sonar tech. Went through BEE, Advanced Electronic Schools. And when I got to sea school, I met, my first wife. And now these are electronics classes going from, resistor theory all the way to digital logic and 21 mods and staying up all night. And then you have to stay up every 3 days on night duty because it's on BEE in San Diego. You studied 5 days a week, and then you had every 3 days night duty the whole night. So basically falling asleep. So my grades went down. They called me in and said, you got to do something different here. You want to become a mechanic? So I said, sure. So they cross-rated me to mechanic. So I went through the electronic stuff, almost fell out of that one, and they sent me to mechanical school. In the mechanical school, I thrived. I mean, I loved the mechanical stuff. Hydraulics, pneumatics, refrigeration, reactor, propulsion, all that. And that's why I became a mechanic. So then from there, you start at the machinist mate second class, third class, and all that. And if you're pretty good, they give you more training. You get what is called NES and NSEs, Navy Education Codes.
Do you consider yourself a patriot of the United States?
Yes, I'm very grateful because had it not been for the United States, I would have died. They were telling my mother before we left because I had asthma. That's the only thing I didn't tell the Navy.
They know now.
Yeah. I wanted to serve so bad. In Cuba, I had a very, very bad asthma condition where if you look at the pictures, I was almost 5'10", and I weighed about 90 pounds. I was literally dying because of the pollution in the air over there and all that. When we came over here, all of a sudden I got really good. Never had knock on wood, never had another asthma attack, ever. So when I joined the Navy, I was like, you know what? I'm so grateful because one of the things I want to do is I want to give back to the country that took me in when my own country, first, didn't want me, and second, I would have died, literally died. And in school, because of my father, who my father was, they used to beat me up. He said, el hijo del preso, he said, the son of the prisoner. So let's beat him up, just for the hell of it. And I always remember that. My own country, I was a, piranha, and over here, the skies open up, so...
One of the reasons why you had the asthma is because you were born prematurely and They didn't have the medical...
Yeah, the medical system to basically, have me... my mother was going through the trials of my father. My father gets arrested on April 1st. And then, she's like, I think it's like 6 months, 7 months, because I was due the second week of October. If my grandmother and numbers were correct, and I think my mom too, she would say like 15 of October, that's when I was due.
1965?
Yeah, 1965. So my father gets arrested, and then he goes into El Morro, which is the big dungeon that they had all the prisoners, political prisoners over there and all that. They were shooting people almost daily and all that, and he was being tried. Now, this is another interesting thing. We didn't know the case number of my father. It was thanks to an association of ex-political prisoners here in the United States that gave us the case number of my father's, 161 of 65. We didn't know that until we got here, because the communists kept that secret.
So you are a highly qualified, highly trained engineer.
Yeah, basically.
You're a patriot. You serve this country admirably. So no one can say anything negative about you not being a patriot in this country like we hear so often these days. Why don't you go back where you came from?
Yeah.
This is your country. You've earned this.
Exactly.
You've earned this.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the 1890s when your
great-grandfather.
Yeah, grandfather. Yeah. And his brother Clemente, was it?
Clemente. Yeah. And they were all the brothers, so we don't know their names. We only have Clemente. They were very close to my great-grandfather, but the other ones, we don't know what happened. They went to Cuba and Pinar del Rio. That's where they landed. The forces, the Spaniards brought over. That's where they landed over there in Pinar del Rio.
Around 1917?
No. 1892, 93 or something like that.
And what happened in 1917? I know it was...
That was my paternal grandfather.
Ah, okay.
Francisco. He's the one that came over. His grandfather also was in Cuba. And he was in 1870. That's probably the one you're thinking about. Both of my great-grandfathers were in Cuba. And it's interesting enough. On my father's side, they were landowners, wealthy people. My grandfather had 21 houses over there in La Habana, very wealthy. Then the Spanish-Cuban War started. He basically dies in a car accident. And then my grandmother sells all the houses to go back to Catalonia on my father's side. On my mother's side, they also landed, but he was the Spanish soldier, the izquierdos.
With the Y.
Yeah, the Y people, yeah.
Yeah. When did it become an I?
We, up to the time we were there, it was all the Y.
Izquierdo
some
with
people,
the Y.
They would Latinized and with the I. for example, la partida de nacimiento, the birth certificates, they would put an I on it. But my grandmother would insist, no, it's with the Y, it's with the Y. And so you have actually, there was a minister in Cuba some decades ago that he was actually Izquierdo. And he's probably related to my great-grandfather or one of the brothers. He became, under the communist, prime minister, Izquierdo.
The crisis of 1917 were military, the political, and the social turmoil levels were extremely high.
Horrible. And that's what my grandfather, because he was born in Cuba. And then they took him, the great-grandmother took him back to Catalonia. But I think he remembered how great things were over there. And then when he was old enough, he came over to the Americas again.
When did communism first land in Cuba?
Well, they took over in 1959. But I heard that the communists were kind of active all the way in the 1950s. Now, what happened in Cuba is people hated Batista. Okay, they hated the guy because he had destroyed, the republic and all that. And the revolution really was going to be to reestablish the republic. As a matter of fact, Castro, he at the beginning said, we're not communist. And he's actually on videotape, and even telling Ed Sullivan, we're not communist. We're here to reestablish the republic and all that. The problem is there was a lot of communists inside, Che Guevara and a lot of people inside of him pushing him over to that. Personally, in our family, we would say he's not communist. He's just a dictator. He loved communism because it gave him the power he wanted to. But really, inside him, he's just a selfish kind of guy. So he used the revolution to take over the government, and become a powerful, dictator, and saying that he was a communist. But no, Castro is for Castro.
When did the USSR stop taking charge, and when did Castro take charge? Was there a transition period?
Well, Castro went to the Soviets because when he actually came here first. He actually was here in New York, and he tried to, make good with the Americans and all that. But the Americans didn't like him because probably they knew who he was hanging out with, the old association, tell me who you hang out with, tell you who you are. So he's got, Che Guevara next to him. He's got a bunch of communists and all around him and all that. And the Americans were not very, very trustful. So he felt like slighted. So he said, okay, and then there were already things in the works from the Eisenhower people. Like the Bay of Pigs was actually made from the Eisenhower, administration. Kennedy inherited basically that mess. My father became a CIA spy once he took over. And my father, one of the reports he was saying, telling them, don't send the invasion because there's a lot of people still on his side. And if you send the invasion in 1961, it's not going to work out because most people were still believing in the Castro, regime and all that. So Castro is like, okay, you don't like me? I'm going to go to the other guys over there. An opportunist, basically. So when the Russians, said, hey, we can have a base 90 miles away from Florida, this will be perfect. And that's why he went to the communists, to Castro.
Your father communicated with the CIA via drops.
Exactly.
That's where I leave some information under a rock, and I leave, and then later
somebody else comes over and picks it up. That way you don't see the other person and all that, basically.
So he communicated with the CIA, but there was a rat.
Yeah. So you got several spies and cells inside the country. They operate independently. They have a common point of contact who they send the information to. In the case of Cuba and La Habana, the ambassadors of the Italian embassy used to be the ones communicating with the CIA. And they were the points of contact. As a matter of fact, one of the things that my father said that that's how he got caught is in 65 February or March, just before he got arrested. One of the things he used to do is go into the embassy and take pictures and take micro pictures because he had a small micro camera. Make a small negative so you could put it in a little small space and
just like in the movies.
Exactly. And he used to do it in the embassy. And the day that the ambassador, basically wanted to set him up, he let the door open. So the Cuban, cleaning people, they were probably G2, that were G2 intelligent officers, could see him and then, lo delató. And they basically gave him up. And the Italian ambassadors before, from the 59 to 64, I think they were full CIA. But that last guy, Moratore, we think that he was a double agent. Because, basically when he took over, that's when my father, and all of a sudden they had these people following him around. So all of a sudden people know who he is inside the Cuban and all that. And when my father and my mother used to go on vacations, they would pair up with some of the families that, we want to get close to you, man and woman together, pretending to be friends, but they're just watching him. So the pattern was after the Moratore guy, became the point of contact, all of a sudden he's got people around him, watching him. So that's when we think that, the double agent thing started. And that's when he,
So you honestly believe that he's the one that was the rat?
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of leftist communists, and I would not have been surprised if he had been communist sympathizer, in the government, and he happened to be stationed over there in Cuba. Which would make sense. I mean, if it's somebody who likes communism and all that, of course you're gonna be the ambassador for your country in Cuba, where things were happening. You're talking 1965, 1964, when the revolution was new, so people were very idealistic about what was going on over there. So he probably was a true believer. But at the same time, the point of contact were all the Italian ambassadors in La Habana. When he came on board, he probably he was in the know. He probably read into it.
It's like Mussolini with the Germans.
Yeah, basically the same thing.
There's one part of your book that really had me riveted when you were describing what had happened, and that was when the G2 went to your
grandmother's house. El registro.
Yeah, and your father was just arrested, and they were looking for
something
to really hammer him with.
Yeah.
And so they went the very next day after he was arrested.
Yeah. Actually, they went the same day. He gets arrested, and there's a team that lands in the house, in la casa. They would do is, to find anything to give him the death penalty. Over there, having guns or private arms or anything like that is illegal. So now he had a revolver from before the revolution, but he kept it. And then, the photography film, he had a dark room, un cuarto oscuro, in la casa to do, things and all that. That was his business. But on the side, he was doing some of the pictures that he was doing for the CIA and all that. Had they caught any of that, he would have been death penalty. Because they were killing people, shooting people on Paredón left and right. Inmediatamente, almost immediately. So when they get there, they surprise my grandmother and my mother. They didn't know that people were going to come over. So they told them, you sit over here and don't move. And they spread all over the house. And they're looking around basically all over the place. And my father had this roll-up desk, and that's where he had the gun in it, the center drawer. And one of the officers goes to the right-hand side, opens the drawers one by one, and they're putting it on the floor because they're looking for anything, dumping it. Goes to the left side, does the same thing and all that, goes to the little cubby holes on the top, and then goes move his hand over to the center, and it stops. And my mother said that he froze. It's like frozen, in space. And then within a few seconds, kind of recovered himself and withdrew the hand, turns around and goes to the other officer. And it tells him, I guess the guy in charge, that part is done. My mother and my grandma are like, what the hell is this? Why did he freeze like that, right? So, okay, the registro was like 8 hours, made a mess of the house, everything on the floor and all that. So by the time that they leave, they're all tired, stressed, depressed and all that. They're putting the stuff away and they're, my mom's going to go see him at the jail. And goes over there, Dad, they do un registro. Se puso pálido, get real pale. And it's like, did they look in the drawer? And like, no, nothing. It's like, whatever garbage is in there, throw it out. My mom's like, okay, and, what are you talking about? Whatever garbage in there, throw it out. So she go back to the house and she opens the drawer and there's a 38 right there. Now, the funny thing is, she went to a espiritista that my mom and my grandmother used to go for decades. And she said que Santa Bárbara lo había salvado. He was a son of Santa Bárbara, the protector. And then when the guy was going to reach in, she was in front with the sword raised. And he was going to basically kill him if he had opened the door. Years later, when I went to Blanes, the hometown of where my family comes from, the oldest church in Blanes is Santa Bárbara.
And a lot of people don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
They think that el espiritismo is something very, very bad. But it's part of the culture. It's part of the fabric of Cuba and Puerto Rico también.
I believe it. One of the things that I studied when I was in, the mechanical world and all that was quantum mechanics, quantum physics and all that. And what I realized is that there's energies around us. Now, we're aware of, the 3 dimensions and time and all that. There's actually physics says there's like 12 dimensions all around us. If there's a spirit world, I believe there are spirits around us. I do believe so. On my mother's side, we see spirits. My grandmother used to see it, my mother. I saw it, my Aunt Nancy. And in Cuba, in la casa, we used to see the spirit of my grandfather and all that. So they used to scare the hell out of me. Because as a 7-year-old, 6-year-old, see something coming out of the wall. But I always believe in spirits. And I believe that story probably has something truth in it. Maybe something intervened. Because what happened to that officer, there's no other explanation. There's nothing to explain how he froze on the last drawer that had the gun in it.
Didn't she say that Santa Bárbara was poised with a sword ready
up to kill him?
They had the key already because they confiscated
They confiscated the keys and all that day. When they walked in, they gave me all the keys for everything and all that. So my grandmother gave me the keys and that was it.
And when they left?
They returned the keys and all that, because the keys of the house and all that stuff and all that. So.
And when she spoke with your father on her next visit,
that's when
he was very cryptic in saying, just throw all that garbage out.
Whatever garbage is in there,
and give him a wink, and he was referring to the gun.
Well, he was in a visitation room, and they're probably recording everything that was, talking between him and my mother. So he was very aware that, whatever he was saying, they were probably, going to try to get him through. So.
Your mother had a real difficult time visiting your dad, and probably the most problematic stage of your father's imprisonment when they shipped him to La Isla
Pino,
which meant your mother had to take trucks and buses and trains and
just to get there.
A boat.
Yeah.
And it was difficult because the boat was
ferry.
6-7 hours.
Yeah.
There was no enclosure.
Yeah, and that's when I had my first asthma attack.
And that's when you got sick.
Yeah. Really bad. Now, she's going with my grandmother, Carmen. There was already an old lady. A newborn, when he went to Isla Pino, was in 66. He was in Moro, La Cabaña, and then they transferred to Isla in early 66. I had just been born in September 30th, 65. But, my father wanted to see me because they didn't know he was going to get fusilado. He was going to get shot and all that. So he wanted to, before dying, he wanted to see his son. So my mom took me. And in that first trip, that's when I had the major asthma attack. That was my welcome to the world asthma.
It started when you were first born.
Yeah, my lungs were
premature.
Weak. And then anything, you throw anything in there, like any cold, anything like that, you're done.
They used to carry a lot of food.
Because they were not feeding him enough. So the families were bringing in big bags of food in every visit. So here's a newborn helping a little old lady and carrying 2 big bags of food. Imagine that. From La Habana, you had to take, several buses and then a couple of trucks to make it to Batabano, which is in the bottom part. And then from there, take the ferry to La Isla de Pino. And then walk from the ferry terminal all the way to the prison.
They used to drag the bags.
12 hours.
At that point, your father was sentenced to 25 years. So there was no thought of, when is he going to get out? I mean, it was just like, he's going to be here for a long time, probably will die here.
Yeah, but first, they had him in this Las Circulares. There were these cells that were open to the La Intemperie, to the air and all that. There were no walls and doors, anything like that. So at nighttime, especially in the wintertime, people think in the Caribbean, it gets cold sometimes. And, people were dying because of getting, pneumonia and stuff like that and all that. And then if one day felt like, we're going to shoot you, I'm going to shoot you right there. One of the things my father said, they used to put them naked, strip them all, put them in a circle in the middle of the field, and then the guards with batons come over and beat them, just for the fun of it. And then they would just hurt him into like a big opening. And then the guys in the back were pushing the guys in the front, and they were trying to get away from the line of officers with batons in the back, beating them up.
Didn't they have trustees that were prisoners themselves but also participated in some of the beatings?
Some people, but most were just the guards, just in the green uniforms and all that. And they were just daily occurrences.
When did your father get out?
That was in Isla de Pino until 68, and then he went to Melena 1 and Melena 2. There were work camps, a little more open. They were working in the fields and all that. And then in 78, President Carter did a deal with Castro. There was some kind of secret talk, and I did find the paper that had the article when they did the talks. And then part of the deal, I guess Carter gave them buses or something like that. Castro let some group of people, like 2,000 or 3,000 prisoners, and among those, to be paroled, and among those was my father. My father was paroled.
Your father was a CIA operative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did he get involved in that in the first place?
Well, in 59, when Castro takes over, there was a big speech that he did in La Habana. And the way he was talking, well, my family was very keen on politics. And so when everybody started talking anything that sounded, the alarm, my father's like, what the hell is this? And then they started instituting like, la ley, the laws for, taking people's properties and all that. And that was when the flags went up. So right from the beginning, my father was like, I don't like these people. And then the big speech that he gave, and he had this white dove's land on his shoulder. And that's when my father and my grandfather, this is esto comunismo. So that's when he said, we're going to do something about it. So he volunteered. My abuelo was dying actually of cancer at the time. But before he died, my father and him were talking. These guys are comunista. This is communism right here. So he volunteered. I think it was when they went to the Italian embassy. And he started spying from 59 all the way to 65. My father was actually one of the cells that when the missile crisis happened, he was taking pictures of the missiles coming in through Mariel y todo eso.
Was he the only one? I'm sure there's probably different cells.
There were different cells watching everything that was going on. Yeah. They knew. They could tell.
And your father never shared that with you until one day you and him had a conversation here in the United States. You were telling him about your exploits. And then he says, well, I'll tell you, son. Vite.
Well, he saw me in my diving gear when I was, diver for the Navy and all that, and the submarines. He starts laughing. And I'm like, Dad, what are you laughing about? So he's like, well, one of the times that I did a dead drop for the Americans right on the beach, he stayed behind because he wanted to see, who was going to pick it up. And out of the water comes these divers. He probably understood they were probably Americans that picked up the little package he had left over there and went back in the ocean. So when he saw years later me in my diving gear, he goes, I was on the other side watching what you guys do.
Were you surprised?
Yeah, he wouldn't talk much. See, in the movies, the spies are very flashy, like James Bond and all that, very flashy. The real guys, you can't tell he's a really spy. I mean, they're very low key. He looks like a regular guy, but what he's doing is unbelievable. So he wouldn't say much until you had to drag it out of him. Thank God I did a few conversations with him before he died in 2012, and that's when I asked him, Dad, what were you doing? Things, and he was explaining about the rocks and the dead drops, and how he was doing microfiche, filming and all that stuff and all that. But before that, he wouldn't even talk about it. It's just the past is the past, and
Tu mamá sabía.
Mom found
the hard way.
Mom found out the hard way.
Yeah.
But Mom, one of the things that they did in the last, Mom, they got married in 1963. Before that, he wouldn't, he hadn't told her anything. The only thing is, on my mother's side, one of my uncles used to work in construction and all that. So the Cubans were doing all kinds of construction stuff and all that. And when he was dating her, he used to go to the house and sit in the porch in the portan and ask him like very detailed questions. Okay, what kind of construction are you guys doing over there and all that stuff? So he's trying to get information from my uncle as he's dating my mother. But then when my mother found out, she was on board. They would do like a team thing. He would pretend that he's taking a picture of her, but focusing actually in the stuff way in the back. So they would go to like a port or something like that, and he's like, oh, look, a beautiful couple. He's taking a picture of her. Not really. He's taking pictures of stuff that is behind over her shoulder.
Abuela Carmen, she didn't have a really solid relationship with your mom. There was some friction there.
Yeah. My grandmother, Carmen Galicia and Gallega, very hardcore, very, hard, working all that. The story is that she already had picked the woman that she wanted my father to be married with. But when my father falls in love with my mother, now that she became a piranha, she's, you're not wanted at all. Oh, God. So from the beginning, she earned the animosity of my grandmother. And she made her life a living hell. Even when she came here, we came here all together. We used to live in the same apartment there in West New York, New Jersey. And she used to make her life a living hell. It got really worse when she got Alzheimer's, but it's just no breaks. And then what happened is she used to force her to live there in the house with her in Melone to keep an eye on her part of I understand because a lot of people when the men got imprisoned, their wives left them. My father, one of the big fears was one day you're going to leave me because this is too hard for you to follow, bring Java aquí de comida, your husband is in jail, you're now the breadwinner with a kid and all that, you're probably going to take off. But they really loved each other. That's one of the things that I admired, and that's what I was always looking for, to find a partner that I would love, like, my wife and I love her very much, that they loved each other like that no matter what happened, they stayed together, and they did.
You were told by the Spiritista that you would have someone that, no, not this one, but that one.
In Italy.
Yeah, and so you were waiting for that.
Yeah.
But before we go there.
Yeah.
You're listening to WPKN in Bridgeport, 89.5 FM, listener-supported community radio. And if you've just joined us, we're listening to an interview by Luis Pomales with Luis Puig. He's the author of a memoir titled Born Again, which tells the story of his childhood in Cuba, where his father was a political prisoner, and his family struggled to survive in that totalitarian regime. Then a daring escape in an overcrowded fishing boat full of refugees, and rebirth as a submariner in the United States Navy. The book has recently placed in the Latino Books into Movies Awards for 2020 and is in the process of being made into a film.
Abuelo Lorenzo, he was a police officer.
He walked into a holdup in a bodega grocery store. He was off duty when he got killed. Everybody knew him, say he was a nice person, all that. He was, basically very loved by the family. So that afternoon he walks in, he's walking towards the house by the bodega. And he could tell there's something going on in there. That's when the bodeguero, he knew him, the grocery store, the guy behind the counter made a signal, like he's, getting held up. So he walked right in, ¿Qué pasa? What's going on here? And that's when the three guys that were sticking up the store basically started shooting at him. And there was a gunfight, and he got killed.
That must have been devastating for your grandmother and the family.
Yeah, I mean, the girls were little. My mother and my aunt were little girls. My grandmother, newly married. I mean, they were married for they have been married for maybe 4 years. My mother was 3 years old, and now Aunt Nancy was 1.5 or 2. So now she's a widow. And when they brought him into the hospital, she's begging, please, somebody help him. Crime over there was not very common. Major shootings like that was not a common thing. So when the crime happened, the word got real quickly around La Habana because, the police are, trying to get the guy because one of the guys had left in the car and he crashed and he gets caught and all that. So the word's getting around La Habana. And then when they hear the name, Izquierdo, the chief of police had been with him during the revolt against Machado. So he's like, wait a minute, Izquierdo? Is that Izquierdo who was with us and all that stuff? So they're all showing up at the hospital. And what my grandmother used to say is that they were all pissed off walking down up the halls and why didn't he tell us he was back here? We would have put him in the picture that my grandmother saved that then she bought in 1992 when she came to visit. Now, she never came with us in 1980. The one that came over was, Carmen. Hortensia stayed behind, and she was able to manage in 1992 to bring the pictures. That's why I had all those pictures that I have, thanks to her. She brought the paper recording, the cuttings, and I still got all of them of what happened. And they say that the president of the republic and all these people were why didn't he say he had come back? We would have made him a minister or something like that. But he was very humble. He was just a cop, and he died a cop. That she was in the basically in the hospital, and they're walking around why didn't he tell us? He came back. And I put the picture on his casket of one of the paper cuttings where the honor guards on his casket is the secretary of police and the defense minister and all that, which were people that were in jail with him. That's the amazing thing.
Somebody.
Yeah. In the book and the paperback, I actually put some of the pictures that grandmother Hortensia brought over.
The book comes in a paperback.
In paperback,
form?
yes, it's in paperback.
Ah.
Yeah.
Carmen was a very, very strong, very strict woman.
Yeah, yes, big time. Una gallega, bro. Hardcore. Not a lot of laughing.
like we're doing now?
Like a dictator kind of thing, Because, she hated my mother. And she hated anything that had to do basically with... I mean, she was very nice to me. Don't get me wrong. Very nice and polite and all that. But there was not like the love I had for my abuela Hortensia.
She was the caring, the loving, the
one,
patient one.
The patient one, yes.
And that you got from her.
Yeah. I mean, she was my mother. When my mom had to go work. When Dad gets arrested, my mom became a breadwinner.
Now, let me ask you this. Let's change gears for a second.
Yeah.
When did the family as a whole come over?
Well, in 80, like I said, we came, my father, my mother, my grandmother, Carmen, and my brother and I. We were the first batch. The second batch wasn't until later because Hortensia, my maternal grandmother, stayed there in the house because as she left, they would have taken the house from her, and my Aunt Nancy was living there too. Nancy with my tío Pepe and my two, left her and they said my two cousins. So as she left with us, they would have, been, okay, this is not your house anymore. You guys have to go live someplace else, and there would have been a big mess. And then Nancy didn't want to leave because Pepe didn't want to leave his, the family chain. Pepe didn't want to leave his family who were living in Matanzas in another province. So you don't want to leave because somebody else don't want to leave because somebody else don't want to leave, and they stay behind.
It was a common thing to have property and possessions taken away from you in Cuba.
Yeah, well, under this system, your house is not yours. There's no private property over there. So the house, for example, my maternal mother's grandhouse, which was paid for by the insurance money of the death of my grandfather, Lorenzo, that became the state. And it's a big house. The picture is also there in the book. It had 2 apartments. It's a 2-level house, concrete, beautiful place. With the main house underneath, and then 2 houses on top that were supposed to be for my uncle Jesus, one of my grandmother's brothers, and another brother, Guillermo. That was the plan. But when the communists came over, they basically gave those 2 apartments to some different people, some people that they picked. So my uncle Jesus was living in La Casa ahí con Hortensia, in the same house that we had. On the paternal side was Carmen and my mother.
So Carmen came over on the first trip?
Yeah, with us in 1980.
So who was part of us? It was you?
My father, my mother, my brother, little brother Leonardo, my mother, and my grandmother Carmen, 5 of us.
Is Nancy and Pepe still in Cuba?
No, they came later. Came in the 2000s. They went through all the hard times and all that over there, during the periodo especial and all the special period 1990s and all that. They finally escaped when my cousin Lester was able to come over, and then he asked for them, reclamó. He reclaimed them, and they came over. And they're here now in Miami.
What process did you have to go through to get permission to leave Cuba?
In 1978, when my father was paroled, he immediately went to the cessation of interest of the American, government over there in Cuba. I remember there was no embassy, an American embassy in La Habana. There was a cessation of interest section of the American, government. We walk in, and they knew who he was. That's another thing that happened. It was very interesting. The American ambassador was inside the main chamber. We were outside. And they usher us in, and when we come into the main office and all that, the guy is standing, and he gives my father his hand. He goes, "Great, you're going home. Thank you for coming home." Because he knew, they knew my father's, CIA involvement and all that stuff and all that. So right away we have visas. All of us, my grandmother, my mother, my father, my brother, and I, we have visas to come here. But that's 1978. Now, in order to leave Cuba, you get a permission from the government to leave. It's not like here you can get on a plane and you're gone. Over there, to leave the country, you got to get permission from the government to leave.
That took a while.
So that they wouldn't let them. You got to get told the permission, and it takes 3 months. And then he gets the paperwork or whatever, and then you got to know this. So they will drag him. So by 1980. We have been going at it since 1978. Yes, 2 years on this stuff. And that's when the Mariel happened, the Mariel boat lift. The original thing was a group of Cubans got on a bus, and they rammed the Peruvian embassy over there in La Habana, and the place filled up with people. So then Castro said, okay, fine. Whoever want to leave can leave. They can get a boat from Miami, and they can leave. And that's when the big boat lift happened.
It's been rumored that when that happened, Castro opened up the doors to all the prisons and let the prisoners.
Yeah.
Was that true?
Yep. He used to purge a lot of his prisons. Well, what happened is the day we decided to leave, we left the house. I said goodbye to my grandmother, Hortensia. Very sad. Nancy, Pepe, and they were all in the porch saying goodbye. That's the last memory I had. And we got on the bus. We went to a place where you had to go and register that you were going to leave and all that. Then from there, we went west of Havana. There's a place called El Mosquito, and that's where the Mariel port was. And there were these buildings. They put us in. We got there in the afternoon, so we had to go leave on a boat next day, and they had us in this building. On the other side of the building, there were these fences, and they were bringing in prisoners and filling up those areas with the fences and all that. And then in the morning, they will pick up from the family size. They pick up a few families, and then the rest were,
See ya.
So in that boat, when we came over, it was a few families, and actually the captain was very nice because he put the women and children in as many as they can inside the cabinet, the cabin. And then the rest of us, we were outside. And since I was 14, almost 15, I was outside with my father. But there was a lot of people around the boat that I could tell that, really...
Questionable.
Hardcore,
yeah.
Especially tattoos. You could tell, real hardcore tattoos, teardrops and all that. Yeah. But at that moment in time, the waves were so high, and you just worry about, surviving.
Speaking of surviving, you spent most of your time over the edge,
puking,
and your father was holding you
by the belt.
By the
little belt. I had a little pair of shorts. I had a little belt, a leather belt, real crappy one, and then a T-shirt, a real T-shirt, and then some slippers I had on. We were on the port side of the boat in the back, and I was basically over the side. Now, inside, there were people vomiting inside the boat that couldn't, get close to the edge because all the edges were taken by people and all that. So there was vomit flowing back and forth on the deck. If you were sitting or all stuff, you had, your legs full of, all that crap all over you and all that. I mean, we stunk.
90 miles.
90 miles.
Like
90
that.
miles.
How long did that trip take?
14 hours. We were lucky. Another families on one of my uncles, Hortensia's brothers and all that, they left too. They had their own place and they left too. They took them 2 days because the boat broke down. So they were out there on the ocean for 2 days, bouncing around, and we got lucky. 14 hours, not too bad.
So when you landed in Florida, how was that? How did that process go? Did they come out to you?
Well,
you just landed on this.
They had set up the piers, so with the boats were coming in, they were, being unloaded, and the Red Cross was over there, military people were there and all that. And now the stories in Cuba had been, that people trying to leave and all that. Sometimes the Cuban Coast Guard was, rounding them up and bringing them in and then shooting people. So when we pull in, this is 1980. The Marines and then the American Army had the green stuff, kind of like the same uniforms that the Cubans were. So when we pulled in, my mother started freaking out because she saw, these green guys, and she was like, "Oh my God, they turned us around. They're going to shoot us all." So she didn't want to get off the boat. And my father had to convince her to, okay. So he dropped me off on the deck in the back there because I'm almost passing out. I didn't even have acid anymore. had been puking so much that
There's
even the
nothing left.
bilis, nothing left. I was just dry heaves, So he left me on the back, went to get my mother, convinced her that, no, we're in Key West, get her off the boat with my brother. Now, my brother's also at the time, he had an infection in his feet, which I ran in the book, and because of bad leather shoes that he had bought in Cuba, and they had an infection, and he almost was losing his feet. So now, I had cuadro. This is what my father's facing. My elderly grandmother, which is also very sick, so he getting her off, getting my mother to get off the boat. She's all freaking out. My brother with his leg all screwed up, and me in the back.
How big was the boat?
It's a shrimp, one of those shrimp boats that has the
uh-huh.
100, I don't know, 100, it's supposed to be, I don't know. To be honest with you, I don't know what size they are. They have the big arms sticking out like that.
So
like
were they
40
Cuban?
feet, 50 feet?
Were they Cuban boats or American boats?
No, American boats.
And
They're being
they went
paid
to
by
Cuba.
American families. And what I read was American family have paid these people to go and pick up their families. But when they got there, the Cubans said, no, you're going to take these people we're going to give you. And your family might go on another boat and all that.
So the American Cuban families
Yeah.
came up with the money.
Yeah. Yeah. These were all paid for by American, and some Cubans that had smaller little yachts and all that went over there. I mean, it was a big flotilla from all kinds of little, small crafts.
So then where did you go?
We got on Greyhound buses, and they took us over to the Orange Bowl in Miami. So that night, my father picked me up. I was passing in and out and all that, and my father grabbed me in his arms. And once he had my mother and my grandmother and all that in the bus, and then picked me up, took me in. The Red Cross has checked us out. Yeah, you guys you can make it. Get on the Greyhound bus, and then we came to Miami. We went to Miami. The whole night driving. My first memory is waking up in the bus, and it's daylight. It's in the morning, and I can see the Orange Bowl we're pulling in. And we were there for like 2 or 3 days. So processing and all that. My father had a phone number of close families, members that on his side of some people that were in Miami and all that. He got on the phone, and then they got us out of the Orange Bowl, and we were in their house for I think like a week, and then those people set us up to come here to West New York and New Jersey.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah.
How did you end up in right off the Hudson?
Yeah, there were jobs back then. The Union City and all that used to be the embroidered capital of the world, so there was a lot of jobs and manufacturing stuff like that over there, and then everybody wanted to come up there. The big Cuban enclave, Union City, West New York, full of Cubans. A lot of businesses.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Bergenland Avenue used to be all Cuban. That's another thing I'm talking about in my book. When we landed there, it was all Spanish.
Miami number 2.
Yeah. Miami's the main hub, but this one was pretty big too. I mean, Union City, West New York, a little bit of Gothenburg, and then a little bit of Jersey City, and it was all Cubans over there. You walked anywhere, you talked in Spanish. There was no English. So, yeah. So you're in a subculture again. And then, my mom had a job, and my father got a job, and,
So this is not the first time this has happened. Like right now, they're doing that with Mexicans.
Yeah.
Okay? And we're thinking perhaps this is the first time that this has ever happened. But
No.
it's not.
Yeah, it's been going on for a while, for a long time.
Happened with the Japanese.
Yeah, exactly.
Now let me ask you this. What was the name of the town?
West New York, New Jersey. That's where I'm.
West New York, New Jersey.
Yes, you got Union City. You got Jersey City, and then you have West New York. They got Gothenburg, and then you got Norbergen.
Right off the Hudson.
Yeah, right on the Hudson.
Okay. You had an enclave of Cubanos right there. But
Yeah.
surrounding that enclave, there had to be non-Latinos.
Yes. There was a Harmon Cove, Gothenburg, a little bit of Gothenburg and all that, and then all the other counties on the side and all that. It was an all-American. And that was one of the big cultural clashes, because like the big movie theaters were in the malls where the Americans were. And I used to go over there, and you were like, we were in awe. We're like, look at these guys wearing nice clothes and the nice cars and the stores and all that. And we're,
McDonald's, wow.
Yeah, and we're in nickel diming, you're surviving, basically. Mom had barely, the salary was like $100 a week or something like that. I mean, just nothing.
Tell me about the cultural clash, the racism, the prejudice.
Yeah. Well, the big thing that we suffered right away was the stigma of the Marielito, the Mariel. Even in the school over there in the Cuban enclave, you had the older Cubans that, some of the kids had raised over here and all that in the high school. And to me, they were Americans, because they would talk to each other in English. They wouldn't even talk to us in Spanish. Some of them, a couple of them did French with that and all that. But most of them were, trying to almost like act like they were not us, And we in the school, we were even segregated. The homerooms, instead of being the typical homeroom where you get a class and all that, we were put in the cafeteria. And we're cafeteria 1 to cafeteria 6. And all the Marelitos were in that little place over there. And in the schools, grades and all that, we were in what's called ESL, English as a Second Language, and a parallel, basically, high school from the regular high school. And it was all Marelitos and all Spanish. And so my friends were all Marelitos, and they're all like me. And at the time, I thought the other kids were Americans. They were probably Americans, because they're dressed in nice clothes and they're all talking in English and all stuff and all that. Little did I know, some of them had been born in Cuba too. They just came here as a little kid in the 60s and 70s. I didn't know. I had no idea. The prom queen and king were actually, they were born in Cuba, but they came here as little kids. But if you looked at them, they look to me American.
They had already become acclimated to.
Yeah.
How did the teachers treat you?
They were pretty good. One of them, I always remember, Mr. Jimenez, big guy, 6'2", and all that stuff and all that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, he would be like, "Vengan mis niños, come like children." He was like a big fatherly kind of guy and all that. And they were pretty good at trying to help us, But like I said, so everything in Spanish.
How about the white teachers?
Not a lot of white people over there. The only white teacher that I had that I remember was the gym teacher. And he would actually, in gym class, he was trying to help us become American. He would play country music. So teach us like, this is how you dance, two steps and all that stuff and all that. And, in the story American, American stories and all that. So for the most part, they were pretty good. I mean, no complaints, really.
What did you want to do after grammar school? You went to high school?
High school is when I went to, because I was almost 15. So we got landed over there in West New York, they gave us, aptitude test. And I did pretty good, so they put me on high school sophomore. So I did sophomore, junior, and senior. Graduated in '83, as from Memorial High School, and then I went to college. But I didn't know what I was gonna do. I had no idea really. Don't know the language. You don't know because we graduated in Spanish. Remember, we graduated from ESL. My English was horrible. I mean, terrible. So I got into Kane College, and again, now the cultural clash, because over there's no ESL, it's all full in English. So I was like, in class sitting there, and in math I was doing pretty good because I love math and all that. But in English and the history and all that, I was just completely so my grades just went down the crapper.
So your main interest was technical.
Math. Always. Yeah, and science.
Even as a kid, you were into models, making.
Oh yeah.
And that kind of carried through math. As an engineer.
In Cuba, one of the things, for example, I did for one of my uncles. He had an old Plymouth, 1956 Plymouth, and he wanted a light in the trunk. Now, this is the old cars that didn't have lights and all that. So I made a circuit. Now, I'm 9 years old. So I got a light bulb, and I designed a circuit with, so I had a little contact. So when he opened up the trunk, the contact would make, the light would come on, connected to the battery, and that was 9 years old. I always liked that, like that stuff, just.
When you mentioned you were a kid and making models, it reminded me of that part of the book where you talked about toys.
Yeah. And
toys were something that you got once a year, and you went to a place and they only had X amount of toys. This was it.
Yep.
Pick one. And
every kid in Cuba was, you were allowed only 3 toys. El primario a year. Yeah. The primary one and then the secondary ones. The primary would be like something fancy, if you can get something expensive.
Like
the secondary, well, for example, one of the things that they did get, my Uncle Pepe, Nancy's, husband, my mother's sister, they used to work in a distribution center. They were accountants. Remember, they were accountants and all that.
So that was your in.
So that was our in. We knew that there was going to be this fancy little maquinita, driving maquinita. So we were able to, then you have to do la cola. You have to do a line for days so you get a spot. because they only had, the government was bringing in maybe, 10 or 20 of those per location. So you've got the good spot in the line, you were secure that you could buy it.
They all took turns.
So they all took turns, 12-hour shifts, they go home, get some sleep, and they all come over.
Just for a toy.
Just for a toy.
And the other 2 times where you were able to get a toy was?
That was it. And every year, once a year.
3 toys.
3 toys, that was it.
Per kid,
yeah.
You hear all these horror stories about life in Cuba. Some people might say, well, that can't be true. And there's some Cubans who are 100% pro-Castro. I've never met anyone like that.
Fools.
How could they negate what you went through when they went through it themselves?
Yeah. Well, brainwashed and so conditioned. It's like like an animal. You condition an animal to, you're ringing a bell and he does something for you.
They salivate, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so getting back to high school, your math was good.
Yeah.
Your other subjects, Okay.
Anything to do with language was horrible.
And here you are, an accomplished electrical and mechanical engineer.
Yeah.
When did that leap happen where you became?
In the Navy, that's when I found myself.
So you graduated from high school.
Yeah. I went to King College, like I said. Yeah. I tried it for a little bit. I was doing pretty good, like math and all that. But then, my English was holding me back because I was still Juanito Marielito, So, but I started to really then realize there's a lot more than just West New York and Union City. There's a lot more than just the Cuban world that you live in and all that. And that's when I decided I wanted to get out of there. I wanted to escape somehow. King College is in Union, New Jersey. I had to take 2 buses. One bus from the school to over there in Union to Jersey City, change over to another bus, and then go to a little part-time job that I had in Union City, in a video store, like back in the days of VHS and Beta and all that stuff and all that. And I was dreaming about getting out of there and escaping, The close would close, right, around 9 o'clock and all that. And the buses at that time of night would be like once an hour. So by the time we closed the store, the bus already passed. So I had to walk from, it was 36th Street to the apartment that we used to live in 62nd. So I used to put a little Walkman on. I had the tape and all that and listen to music as I'm walking home, especially in the winter was, in the snow and all that, walking in New York Avenue and Berkeley Avenue and all that. And in my head, I was, trying to escape out of there. And then by that time, I already got my driver's license. And my brother and I used to go to the American, mall, to the movie theaters. And I was seeing these Americans with all this nice, clothes and the nice life and all that. And I wanted that so bad. So I figured, well, the only way I can probably do that is I had to become American. I had to change and become part of this culture. And at the same time, I loved the military. I loved the Navy and all the, stuff and all that. That's what my idea was to, go into the Navy.
There was an allure for the Navy.
Yeah, of course. Escape. Yeah.
You mentioned the movies.
Yeah.
It must have been mind-blowing to sit there and look at this big screen and watch any movie you chose to watch.
Yeah.
I'll let that out. Which is a far cry from the movies that you used to see in Cuba. Because you were basically fed
whatever they wanted
propaganda from the USSR and perhaps a few French movies. Any movie that didn't suggest that what was happening in Cuba was wrong. And everything that happened in the United States was bad.
Yeah, exactly. They're brainwashing, basically.
Bad.
Yeah.
Wow. You must have sat there and thought about that.
Yeah. Well, you realize, wow, look at the possibilities. That's what I was, seeing here. That you have a whole different venue of things you could do. Which was unthink of, over there. I was, heard of.
You know what I hear in your story? Abuela Hortensia.
Yeah.
That's who I hear.
Yeah. She basically me inculcó. She made me part of who I am today. So
she must have been a fascinating woman.
Yeah.
She's still alive?
She died. She died late 90s.
So you became enamored with the thought of being in the Navy.
Yeah.
So at that point, were you a citizen?
No, my citizenship happened in 1987. We have been, given residency, or refugee recognized,
asylum.
And all that, so asylum and all that. So, and then later on, my parents also became, citizens and all that. I think in the late 90s.
So your father's involvement with the CIA benefited you years later. Didn't even realize how important that was because
when I went for my secret clearances and all that in the Navy. They knew who my family was because for secret clearances they look at your whole picture, you and your family and who you are, and they send investigators and all that stuff. So they knew, no problem. Oh, you're in.
You were in ROTC, no?
Yes, I tried it a little bit. Original, like I said, I went to King College and even a little bit of Jersey City State and all. And then I said, well, I gotta get out of here, so I went to boot camp in '87. Which actually I wrote. It's 33 years. This now in February and all that. I was in boot camp in Orlando, loving life.
And when did you become a citizen?
That fall after boot camp, I joined as active reservist first because I wanted to go in the officer program for the Navy ROTC. So I went to boot camp. Then we went to the University of Rochester as an ROTC midshipman. Yeah, that was but my English is crap, and so I'm setting myself up bad. I should have gone active. Now, retrospect, I should have gone fully active. But anyway, I went to try it that way. So I got accepted to the University of Rochester as an NROTC, undecided student, and I started doing my drills and all that. And then that's when my date for the citizenship came up. So I went back to West New York, New Jersey City, and I was in my full uniform, and I did the swear-in in my uniform and all that. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Were your family there?
No, my mom and dad were working. So that day I just went by myself. I got a bus from West New York, landed over there on my own. That was it. I've been alone a lot of my life. Unfortunately, to get ahead and to do the things you have to do, sometimes you have to leave family behind. And that's been the story of my family. I mean, from living in Cuba and all that, that's what it takes.
So when you enlisted in the Navy, did you intend on being a submariner?
No, like I said, at first I wanted to go into aviation.
Wow, you're an Airedale.
That's an Airedale. Green stripes. You see the boot camp, graduation. I got the 2 green stripes, and I got a little Airedale, airman apprentice and all that. And I went to, became an ROTC, midshipman and all that. And then I started really doing really bad in college. And my grades were going down the tubes, and money's getting high. So I'm like, I'm gonna fail out of here. I'm going to probably go back in defeat to West New York. I don't want that. And over there in Rochester, because I live in campus full of Americans, I'm seeing the American life. And I wrote in a book, one of the things that happened was I went to the house. One of my friends that took us out to the house and all that. Middle class, in the woods, kind of like what I have now. And I'm sleeping on the couch. And we have gone to a football game and all that and staying in his house. And the next morning I wake up and I'm in his couch and I'm looking at the sliding doors into his backyard. And there's this beautiful, beautiful calf, deer over there with the full thing. And I'm laying there and I'm looking at this whole thing and thinking, these people are rich. I want this. This is what I want. So I said, you know what? I'm not going to go back home. I'm going to go full active in the Navy. And that's why I, enlisted fully. And that was it. That was the final, change to that. As an Airedale. So then I go in. Then now I take another test, and I'm like, your tests are really good. What the hell are you doing as an Airedale? So I say, why don't you become a sonar tech? So it's like, okay, sonars, okay. So I go to San Diego. I'm in the ASW Submarine Base Training Center over there.
Sand dog.
Yeah. So I'm training and all that, and I'm bunking with a bunch of, because the Sonar Tech K school was surface guys and submarine guys all together in the same school and all that. And the guy's like, why don't you become one of our submarines? Because you'll be perfect for us and all that. So I cross-rated from STG to STS. And I graduated from the STSA school, Sonar Tech A school. So then they sent me to NTC San Diego for the Advanced Electronics School, BEE. So then I survived that. I was
survives a good
23 months of from basically resistor theory, bad boys are rape, our young girls behind Victory Guard, all the way to digital logic and all that. So I survived that. I did so well that they said you have a choice of orders on the submarines. You can go fast attack and go boomer. What do you want? I was in the 5%. So I chose ballistic missile submarines, the big trends. And the school for that was in Bangor, Washington. That's when I went out to Washington. And that's when I met my first wife, which, rec.
That was your Class B school?
That's C school.
Okay.
Sonar Tech. Because in the submarines, you have to go to A school as operators. Then you have to go to C school, the actual maintenance, before you go to a submarine. You can't go just with A schools.
Yeah.
You have to be able to fix the stuff down there.
You had to jump through those 2 hoops first before you became a submariner. And even then...
You're still not a submariner. When I cross-rated from STG to STS, and they said, you got to go to Connecticut because you got to come here to Groton,
New London,
to go to submarine school, because every submariner has to go to sub school. So they sent me from San Diego to Connecticut. I went to sub school, passed survival that, went back to San Diego, finished STSA school, and that's when I went to Washington. Yeah.
Washington State?
Washington State, yeah. in Bremerton.
See, I don't remember that part.
Yeah, it's all in there. It's all in there.
You know, there's so much information in that book. Once you start, you're stuck. It's like watching a novela. You know, ¿Qué le pasó a Victor Manuel? You know, I gotta watch it. Or Caso Cerrado. You know.
Well, like I said, I kept it. I tried to keep that book to as much simple as I could, because there's so much stuff.
Yeah, you could never. No.
The miles. I tell people it's not the years. I'm almost 55 years old. But it's not the years, it's the mileage. Like, you know, in the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, he's all banged up. And then she's like, oh, what happened to you? It's like, it's not the years, the mileage.
You have to read the book, you have to listen to the audiobook, and then you have to go see the movie.
I don't know if they'll make it.
You got to go see. Bro, you can't film this kind of stuff. One, because it's real.
Yeah, the story of
you know, everybody likes a 007 movie, you know, with spies and SEALs going on the beach and flotillas. And
there's a story of but like I said, I don't consider our story is interesting, but I'm sure there's other people that had the same stories, especially for the Cubans. There's a lot of people had the same thing, because I've been reading. I'm a little bit on Facebook, and I'm in a page called All Things Cuban, and there's a lot of people putting their stories there, and you will not believe the stories in there. Oh yeah. It's called All Things Cuban, and there's like 25,000 or 30,000 people are, you know, connected to that page. It's a lot of Cubans putting their memoirs and the family pictures, and I'll tell you, it's incredible stories in there. But you don't hear much about it, and that's one of the things that's why I wrote the book. I'm like, somebody in our family has to write something down, so we don't lose all these stories and what happened.
You're an American story.
Yeah.
You are an American story. You are a patriot. You're a rags to riches story.
Thank you.
You know, you're a spy movie.
Yeah.
You know, you're a novela. All of that.
Yeah.
And salsero también, you know. This is the first time I've ever had the opportunity to speak to someone with your background.
Thank you.
It's real. Okay, before we go, it would be right to talk about your dad and your mom and how life ended for them.
Yeah.
The story of your father is one of a hero. The story of your mom was of a loving woman who supported your father in all ways. If Abuela Carmen knew half of what your mother did for your dad and for you, I'm sure that she would change her mind completely.
Yes.
You know, I have no doubt. So please tell us the end game for your dad and for your mom.
Well, my parents really, their life together was here in the United States. In Cuba, like we were talked about, from 1965 to 78, Dad was in prison. Then after that, they were still living in kind of like a subjugate to Carmen's, things in a little room in their house over there in La Habana also. So when we moved here to West New York, that's when Mom and Dad really started living their family life for the first time. And they had their own place where they, were together and all that. And the struggling, working very long hours, little jobs and all that. Unfortunately, their end was pretty bad. Mom died of cancer. She was 63 years old. She had breast cancer, which at first they misdiagnosed as it was arthritis. And she would go to a doctor, one of those mill doctors. You go into a room, there's a lot of people, they take you into another room. The guy comes in, looks at you, and, you're okay, take the aspirin. By the time they caught it, it was a stage 4. The cancer had spread all over her body. It goes into her brain. They gave her chemotherapy, they gave her radiation, and she literally died in our apartment, in the bed, screaming bloody murder, no hair. The whole thing, the eyes blinded because the radiation had swallowed her head and all that. My father at her side back in 2003. Dad never moved out of that apartment because he was so attached to that life. He didn't want to even let go after death and after her death. He would stay there by himself. My brother and I, we actually invited him to come and live in our house and all that. He said no. He used to come over to, stay with us for a little while. And then in 2012, in Christmas time, he died. He had a heart attack. He was 85 years old. My brother, who had invited him to go over during Christmas break with him, called him the night before. He had talked to him. And then when he called him the next day, he was going to go pick him up. He never picked up the phone. By the time he got to the apartment, he found him dead in the bed. So he died alone. He died on his own. The funeral was very small. Only a few, family members together, a couple of friends that came over. But here's a man that, did a lot of things in the end, by himself. So
your father died a hero. You know that.
Oh, thank you. He's my hero. One of the things that I always tell everybody, he's my hero. Yeah.
And your mom, she was a hero too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great story, man.
Thank you.
What do you want people to get walking away from this book?
Never, ever let down your dreams. Life is going to throw you a lot of, roadblocks in front of you and all that. If you got something that you want to do, I believe deeply that anybody can make anything they want to if you really want it bad enough. My wife and I it's an interesting story because the last 15 years, we have been having so many difficulties. But tenacity, stay with it. I saw an interview with Morgan Freeman on CNN one time. And he said a phrase that I love. He says, courage is the key to life itself. You think about that. It's perfect because as long as you have the courage to do what you have to do to overcome whatever difficulty you have, you can do anything. I do believe it. Yeah, you're going to have racism. You're going to have people, trying to get in your way. You're going to have bad difficulties, acts of gods and all that. Of course, it's going to be there. But the people triumph are because you never stopped. That's what I did. I wanted it so bad. I just kept going until, I got to what I got to.
The name of the book is Born Again by Luis Puch.
Yep.
Thank you for being here, brother.
Hey, man. Appreciate it, bro.
And that concludes an interview by Luis Pomales with Luis Puch, the author of a memoir titled Born Again. Mr. Puch's name is spelled Puig, although it's pronounced Puch in the Catalan manner. You're listening to WPKN in Bridgeport, 89.5 FM, listener-supported community radio.